Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Friday, May 5th Land Use Committee meeting. Sorry we're a little late getting started. The EDC decided to take longer than needed. First up on our agenda is an update on the ADU ordinance, which did indeed pass this past Monday night, so it is fully enacted. And now Howard Schneider, our Community Housing Navigator, is going to give us an update because he's working on our handbook.
Well, thank you and good morning. You took a little bit of my thunder. That was a real benchmark that we needed to pass. And now that those parameters are firmly set, we're going to start advancing into developing the handbook. So there'll be content that comes forward intermittently as that progresses. We're finalizing some scope of work for some consultants that will help us in the visualization that's going to be placed into the handbook. But one thing that, as that has progressed and reached a good point where there's going to be some steady flow and progression on it, what I would like to do is just mention the public improvement plan that also needs to start being brought up to the same level of effort. I've started drafting some content draft that I want to present to the Land Use Committee in the next meeting, I hope, because some of that needs to be finalized as the report progresses, and notably the vision statement that needs to be placed in the beginning, as well as formalization of the goals.
Great. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or input for the handbook?
When do we start seeing first draft?
Of the handbook? A few months.
Or graphics?
Couple
or anything.
anyway. Yeah, a couple of months.
All right. Moving on, we are going to continue our discussion on density incentives and the character districts that we had started last meeting, and we have some actual draft zoning amendments that were posted, and I'm gonna, I believe, hand this over to Nick for that portion.
Thanks, Beth. As Beth said, we presented some initial suggestions for zoning amendments at the last meeting, and we're really focused on the three density incentives in the character districts, primarily downtown. They do apply to the West End as well, but it's mainly the downtown. And just as a recap of the three density incentives, one's for parking underneath a building or behind a liner building, which would be exemplified by what the AC Hotel did, and the Brick Market at the corner of Daniel and Penn Hollow. Both of those use the density incentive that's already in the zoning to put the parking either underground or behind a liner building. So that's the first category of three. The second is the overlay districts that people are more familiar with along the North Mill Pond, both in the West End and the North End. Properties that are within that overlay district get the incentive or the carrot of an additional story or a larger footprint and a few other minor incentives in exchange for community space or workforce housing. And then the third density incentive for downtown or for large parcels over 1 acre in size. And we've looked at the maps as we discussed last month. There are about eight or nine properties that would qualify for the incentive. I think the only property that's utilized that outside the overlay district and one that didn't just do underground parking was the Portsmouth Housing Authority on Court Street. They did get an extra story. They had a parcel over 1 acre in size, so they used that incentive. I'll point out that when you look at the three of them, the only one that requires currently a conditional use permit is if you do workforce housing in the overlay district, number one, or you do the underground parking or the liner building. So the AC Hotel and the Brick Market both needed conditional use permits. The others were initially drafted and adopted as an as-of-right scenario. So they're optional and they're voluntary for the property owner, but they're not conditional use permits. And I think that's primarily driven because they didn't, the other two density incentive situations have workforce housing as a requirement. So what I'd like to focus primarily on today is the, looking at the list here, did I reorder them? I can't even see that. Is the third one for the large parcels. So it is the third one on this list. So what I'll do is quickly go over what what we discussed last meeting in respect to the first two. And I apologize, the text is small here, I'll zoom in, but this is in the handout that's been circulated. So I'll be very quick on the first two because I've made no amendments to this from last month for the first two density incentives. And the idea here was in the overlay district and in the situation where you have parking below or behind a liner building, that we would like to require a conditional use permit and workforce housing. So if you're going to do community space, which is parks, greenways, wide sidewalks, passageways, alleyways, that's what we've been getting 90, 99, 100% of the time. Actually, we've had one project approved with workforce housing and it wasn't built. This is again in the downtown, not out on Lafayette or the Gateway districts. It's only downtown. We've not yet had one project opt to do workforce housing in the mix, in the land use profile of the project. So the goal with these first two amendments is to require at least some workforce housing as well as community space. That's at least the intent of what's been drafted. This is again for discussion. It's not the finished product, but that was the intent of going into these two sections and adjusting the language, and that obviously is a big change to have workforce housing. Some people wanted it to be only workforce housing and not community space, sort of flip it on its head. If we're only getting community space, we had a conversation last month that not a lot, but there are a number of folks in the community that don't really see the benefits of the community space for what is perceived to be a pretty large carrot of giving somebody an extra story on their building or a bigger footprint. But part of our discussion was some of that stuff you got to wait and see it happen because the Greenway in particular along the North Mill Pond is going to take several years to actually come to completion because we have to assemble all the parcels largely through this incentive, do the design, do the permitting, and then do the construction before we're going to see that amenity, which I argued last month and I'll continue to do so, is going to be a phenomenal public benefit for the citizens of Portsmouth when it's built, but we don't see it yet. And importantly, all this property that we're acquiring through this incentive program, it's all private. It's not public property. So the only way we would have achieved securing that property was to open our own wallets and buy it, hopefully voluntarily, but the only other way to get that land is eminent domain, neither of which are good prospects. That's why the code was written and adopted in the way it was. The carrot is to get the larger building. The stick is to give us the space that the citizens of Portsmouth have suggested strongly they'd like to acquire and see redeveloped as community space. So the only adjustment that I started to talk about, and I haven't changed it in the last month for these first two amendments, is requiring again a degree of workforce housing for these other two options, and allowing the unit size to be smaller than the average size of the unit in the building. It's a big economic repercussion for the developer, the builder, the owner to have every unit be the same basic size. These are very expensive units in the downtown to construct. So we had heard some feedback from some of the folks as to why we're not getting any of them. We've had 11 projects in the last 7 or 8 years that this has been on the books, and again, none of them have done workforce housing. And some of the numbers that were that are still in our ordinance create a disincentive from an economic perspective of doing it, so they opt to go to the community space option. So, does anybody have anything they want to say on what we presented last month for those two density incentives before I go to the one that's really changed, which is the third option for the large parcels? And we can come back to it if you want to hold your questions.
I just had a question about unit size.
Yep.
Just in general, how do we come up with 600 square feet?
600 square feet seemed like a good number for a two-bedroom unit.
Okay, so that's
And
two-bedroom.
it's a minimum, not a maximum.
Right.
Okay.
And that's across the board, not only specified to the workforce housing units.
No, it's only for the workforce housing units need to be at least that size.
And
The other
previous-
market rate units could be whatever they are. The existing code says if the average unit in the building is 12 or 1,400 square feet, that's got to be the size of the workforce housing unit.
And so that was going to be my point or question. Was that not in place to create equality across the board?
It was, and it's a good intention, but if the intention results in zero workforce housing, it's not working.
I would agree with that, definitely.
And the financial implications, the differential in the market rate for the 1,400 square foot market rate unit that might sell for $2 million, you're looking at $400,000 for the same unit as a workforce housing unit. So it's a pretty good indication the numbers are not going to attract somebody to do the workforce housing. And if we were to go forward and somebody's doing 1,400 square foot units and needs to do that in workforce housing with the existing code, and we require this, probably we will not see anybody using any of the incentives, and we won't get the community space either.
Right.
So it's a 600 square foot minimum. Most of the units being built downtown don't average 1,400 either. They're smaller than that.
Marginally.
Yeah, well, 1,100, but it's
Yeah.
still twice the size that would be needed to create a two-bedroom unit.
And yeah, in aggregate, over the course of an entire development, you can gain another 600 square foot unit based on that difference.
Yep.
I'm
That,
just-
I'm not going to sit here and suggest it's a perfect number, but we did get some
Why
feedback.
does it have to be 2 bedrooms?
It doesn't, but you want to
What's
be
a
able to.
1-bedroom?
Well, 1 bedroom, you could fit 500, but it seems like that's squeezing into too tight a space to require the workforce housing to be either a micro unit, a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom unit.
And what is micro unit versus just a small unit?
Micro units, well, they're not the same. They can be the same, but a micro unit in our code is never more than 500 square feet. Some cities and towns use 400 square feet. It's basically a studio. You don't have a bedroom. A micro unit is typically without a bedroom. So
And-
you'll have a Murphy bed if it's 400 square feet. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't know that we want to, and we can discuss and debate this certainly moving forward, but I don't know that we want to require somebody in a workforce housing unit to really, if you require it or allow it to be a micro unit, if you lower this number, that's all you're going to get typically out of a builder.
And you have to be careful with workforce housing. It is defined as being suitable for families, and families typically need more than
I
a
think
studio.
you have to allow 2 bedrooms in work. I'm not the expert in workforce housing, but I think the statute suggests,
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I for many years lived in Atlantic Heights, and 2 people in a 2-bedroom at 627 feet, and we felt perfectly aligned in there. So it is a very doable number. I think as a minimum, I think it's a very doable number. I think if you look at, again, Atlantic Heights, where we have 50-plus individual units spaced around that number, that we find that it can be done at that as a minimum.
To dovetail off Bob's question, maybe, Nick, is it also a parking calculation as well for micro versus workforce versus small?
Well, there is a difference, but that wasn't the driver here. This would
Right,
require
right.
1 space, and 500 would require a half space.
So that is a requirement as well?
Parking's a
At least one
requirement.
space.
It would be in this situation, yes. If they go over 750, which they're welcome to do, it'd be 1.3.
under the current parking
Under the current
regulations that are going to be looked at.
Right. Thank you.
One question. Could you just touch on what 60% of the average area median income for a 3-person household sorry. Why would it be 100% of the area median income for a 4-person household? If you just explain.
For the sale versus the rental?
Yeah.
Well, again, first of all, let me just tell you, this is the existing language we have.
Yeah.
We are in the process of hiring RKG to help us understand not only the math that goes with the economic sub-districts downtown and make sure these numbers are good, so the incentives work. We're also going to be looking at, the RSA or the state requirements are what is shown here.
Okay.
So I don't know that I can fully explain that, but the difference between a sale unit and a rental unit is different from an economic perspective, which is why
Yeah.
this is calibrated in the state statute differently.
Yeah.
So the 100% is on a for sale unit and the 60% is on a rental. And we just grabbed that, I think, right from.
It's straight out of the statute. It's
Yeah.
straight out of the statute.
It's out of the
We'll
statute.
get a better answer than just saying we're cutting and pasting.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
don't
I
think
just-
it's optional to change it. You can probably have deeper affordability,
Yeah.
but you can't have less.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So I didn't lessen it. because the economics are already fighting hard against in the downtown. We're not talking about, again, Gateway or outlying areas where the land rents are a lot cheaper. You may be able to get deeper affordability outside downtown, but downtown, we probably have to stick with the state statutes as the floor.
I have one question regarding, we went from 30% to 10% and then added only 10% of workforce housing. Maybe
Where are
we
you?
I'm talking on the.
The first one.
Yep. So at least, how much property is community space?
Oh,
So we're
yeah,
asking
30
for
to 10,
both.
yes.
Right, you went from 30 to 10, but we're only asking for 10 of workforce housing. You know, I'm thinking maybe we should either not drop that one all the way down to 10 and have the other one 10, or maybe, I don't know, if we were asking for 30% before, maybe we could get 20 and 10, or 15 and 15. Is there any argument to say that we couldn't still at least expect 30% of something? See what
I
I'm saying?
think I do, and I want to encourage people, again, RKG is going to be helpful even if this is done as a second pass.
Yep.
Later, because,
There's a way to test that, and it's by drawing it.
well, there's,
That's really a better way to test it than picking a number out of the air.
well, I think at the end of the day, that's important, but what's probably more important is the math, right? Because we know that 10, 20, and 30 are going to work, but it's what do they translate from an economic standpoint to the person voluntarily jumping into this pot, right, and asking for the added height or footprint. So the economics are going to drive these numbers all of the time, whether it's 5%. If you go from 10 to 15% workforce housing, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars moving to the developer side of the balance sheet. So you have to be very careful, especially with the workforce housing. So they're not sort of equal, they're not apples to apples. 30% community space is probably the same as 5% workforce housing, depending on the quality of the community space. If it's just a wetland or just an open piece of grass, there's not a lot of improvement costs. But if it's a boardwalk along the water, then it'd be different. So it does come down to the math. And it's going to be imperfect here because the community space types, we have 13 now. I'm advocating later on in this presentation we go to 16. They all have different economic implications as to which one is appropriate for the specific site, the property that's in question. I do think we could get higher than 10, but I don't know how much before this starts to get unwieldy for the person that we're encouraging to do this. Because if we make these numbers too punitive, no one's going to use it, then we get zero.
Right.
So
Can you not make it a percentage of total units? Can you not make it a tiered percentage of total units? 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15?
I don't know what you mean by that. Right now, it's 10% as drafted, the number of units.
So maybe it graduates with the number of units you have? So if you have a 50-unit development versus a 5-unit?
So I would say the answer is you could do anything, but you need to understand the math to do it. One, not you, but
Economies
all
of
of
scale
us.
when you're building 50 units is significantly better than 5 units. And so if you're talking about affordability and the economics of it, then a developer is much more apt to at least consider the 50-unit development and a larger percentage of, if that is ultimately his trade-off.
And I completely agree that's doable. Most cities and towns that I'm familiar with that aren't necessarily in New Hampshire,
Yeah.
they have in lieu payments for small projects for that exact reason. They pay their fair share, but it's because the economies of scale aren't there. Under 10 units is typically where the in lieu payment gets made. We can talk about that later. So there are a lot of ways to slice and dice it, but they have to be supported by the RSA, and they have to be that's the most important. The second most important is they need to be economically viable strategies or they won't work.
Correct.
Right? And I know you know that, and I'm just telling you, I don't have all the answers. We're in the process of hiring an economic analyst that specializes in that workforce housing field in respect to the economic implications. So these numbers are likely going to change in the future.
So you identify two different numbers that are on either sides of the scale.
Exactly.
And they're going to need to be balanced, and it requires some outside input that is in the works.
Well
So-
said.
So
That's what I'm trying to say.
we should just leave it at the 10 and 10 for now.
Yeah, I think it's a placeholder.
we have more. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on those two? Good questions. All right, let's go to the meat and potatoes for this month from last month. So the density bonus for large parcels over 1 acre in lot area. This came up at the city council on Monday as a question to me, and I've been looking at this for 6-8 weeks. I presented something in a dumbed-down fashion a month ago to this forum. That third incentive, again, is for parcels or parcels that could be assembled by the same property owner to be over 1 acre in lot area. Right now, the existing code says if you have a parcel over 1 acre, you can get an additional story or 10 feet on your building height, and you need to provide 20% community space on your property. So again, I think the Portsmouth Housing Authority is the only one that has done that, and that's not because it's a bad amendment or a bad section of the ordinance. There just haven't been applications. Mark McNabb with the Brick Market used the parking, but he could have used this. He had an acre with the police station, the former bank, and the parking lot being assembled, which is what he did. He used those together to generate his 30% community space in the second incentive, so I haven't lost you yet. These get used differently in different places downtown. So when we were looking at the question came up about the McIntyre property, because there's been a lot of analysis and review of the community's intentions of what the community would like to see there under the so-called community plan. So I ran the numbers on that community plan just to test them against the existing code and the 20% community space. I also ran them against the original plan in 2019 that was proposed by the city and the development partner, just to see how those numbers would apply to the existing zoning. And adjusted these numbers to address, again, the workforce housing component, and hopefully allow the community, should the city not participate, which seems to be the way it's looking for the McIntyre property, and I keep referring to it, but remember there are at least 4 or 5 other properties that haven't been redeveloped, like the Citizen Bank down on Pleasant Street. It's over an acre. It's allowed to use the existing incentive. There are a couple of churches downtown that, should they, God forbid, not be there, are over an acre in size, and we did see the Salvation Army leave Middle Street, so it's not impossible. But St. John's has well over an acre, and so does the Baptist Church. There are a number of other properties, but think of Citizen Bank if you want one that likely will get redeveloped in the next 20 years somehow. What I tried to do here was look at the carrots and sticks and change them to better achieve what the community has at least suggested we'd like to obtain with something like the McIntyre property, having extensive open space, community space, and again we have 13 types. I'm suggesting we expand that to 16 as part of a reflection of the community space types that are shown on the concept plan, and recalibrate these numbers. So the carrots get bigger for somebody to do this, and the sticks get bigger, so the city has a better opportunity to achieve many of the same public benefits that it was trying to obtain through the partnership program or the monument program that we've just spent a lot of time, energy, and effort pursuing. So the 3 big shifts, if you will, looking at the language in front of you, was dealing with the fact that the building footprint, the size of the building on the ground, right now you're limited in the existing code to 30,000 square feet of building footprint in the CD5 and 20,000 square feet, I think, with the incentives in the CD4, neither of which work in the McIntyre. For example, it has 35,000 square feet of building footprint already today with the existing building. The buildings that have been contemplated on that site through the community plan, whichever version you look at, are largely attached to one another to create pedestrian connections between the existing buildings and proposed buildings. So again, if the community wants to achieve anything that we've illustrated and designed for the community plan in the last 2 years, the building footprint is a problem when all the buildings are connected. It exceeds what is allowed. So I've attempted to, and some of the exceedances don't make sense to pretty much all of us. For example, if there is a market hall or a plaza or a square in the middle of a project, whether it's on the McIntyre, the Citizen Bank, or any of the other banks that develop the parking lots, if you wanted to have a big public space in the middle of a square, and underneath that square was parking, and that square was elevated, and if it's elevated more than 18 inches off the street edge, it constitutes building footprint, even though there's maybe no roof on it, it's open to the sky, has a fountain in the middle, and it's a public square like Market Square without the cars in it. That would constitute, if it's over 18 inches elevated, so if there's 3 steps to get up onto it from the sidewalk. The problem with the existing code, because it never anticipated these types of places, because we don't have one, is that that would be considered building footprint, and you'd have to march off to the Zoning Board of Appeals, or the BOA, to seek relief for that, which is a high bar, asking somebody on the outside to do such a thing when we don't even, I wouldn't think as a community want to force somebody to get a variance to create a market hall for public purposes with easements to the public, just because there's 3 steps to get up into it.
And you don't write a proposed zoning change anticipating the need for variances.
Correct. Correct. And, in fairness to all of us that put the existing code in place, the building footprint definition was either already in the books decades ago, or we amended it 7 or 8 years ago when we did the form-based coding. I don't remember. It's a clunky definition, but it includes everything over 18 inches that's connected on a building. So, if you think of 64 Maplewood, the new building with Fidelity, we have the arcades going along the street, and that we have public easements. We designed those intentionally to widen the sidewalks, allow the living over the first floor, and create that interesting space that we hope is interesting when it's all done. So the public can leave the open sidewalk and go under cover in the arcade, and that's community space, but that counts as building footprint because there's parking underneath it. So it's another example where it really doesn't make sense in all instances that where you have community space on top of typically basements or underground parking, it really shouldn't count as building footprint. It discourages it from happening. It's a disincentive. So I attempted here in this draft to rewrite the definition of building footprint, and I am certain what I've done is imperfect, and we're going to need to work on it, because I just took rather than dissect and reconstruct the definition of building footprint that's been here for a couple of decades, I just created an exemption for community space that sits on top of it, that would disqualify the space below it from being counted as building footprint. So it may not be the right solution, but you understand the intent of what I was trying to do. So if something like the McIntyre was to be redeveloped by someone else, and they came into the city and they're following the code, they would understand we do want things like a plaza. We do want passageways that go through the building on the ground floor. We do want wide sidewalks so we can support outdoor dining without blocking the sidewalk or taking parking. We do want the amenities. We do want to encourage a rooftop observation area, which is a use we don't currently have that I'm proposing we insert. It doesn't mean if we adopt this zoning we're going to get all that, but we at least are going to be much closer. We'll have rounded second base solidly, and maybe we'll be on third base when somebody sits down across the table to design their project, and they want the carrots, which I haven't talked about. We're on the sticks here, right? What do they have to give us to obtain this conditional use permit? And I'm suggesting we go from 20% community space to 50%, and that may be aggressive, and we may want to lower that a bit, but I can tell you on the McIntyre concept for the community plan, we are well over 50%. We're about 55, 56% community space if you count the observation deck on the roof of the building. It's 53 without it. So, we don't want to strap this too tightly to the plan, but 20% gets you virtually nothing. And I believe the 2019 plan, for what it's worth, had about 30% community space that people felt was too overburdening, too big, and too tight in respect to it's shocking how much community space there is when you look at the plan. And we've done the math to confirm the numbers. But this number is the high water. It may come down a bit as we talk more about it, but I don't think it has to come down a whole lot for us to be able to achieve from the market. This is, again, not purchasing this space. It's doing a trade, allowing the building to be a little bit taller, a little bit bigger on the portions that are not community space. Yes.
I could be naive to this, given experience, but to Mr. Tillman's point about not writing a code with the anticipation of getting a variance, in my eyes, I don't think all variances are created equal. Like, some of them don't have to be so scary to developers, and there could be more opportunities if they are pursuing a variance for the city to participate in some of those concepts of redevelopment, where if it is a underground parking situation with a plaza on top, that would allow the city to maybe participate and not prevent, but be proactive about what they want, and therefore get a better result. Regardless of the percentage that we're asking for, it seems like a better way to have a good dialogue, because the developer is going to have to come to the planning board and all these boards anyway. So it may not be a variance in its technicality, but some
What
ability.
you're talking about possibly is a special exception.
Correct.
Those are permitted uses that require special criteria to be met. That's different. That is an allowed use. And a conditional use permit is similar to that, except the conditional use permit stays at the planning board, whereas a special exception goes to the Board of Adjustment. And the appeal period, the appeal processes for each of those decisions are different. So what Nick has drafted by keeping this in the conditional use permit planning board realm is planning board discretion. You could add on to that a special exception criteria for some special circumstance. That's,
Yeah, I wouldn't advise that, but.
I wouldn't advise it either, but I'm just saying.
No, I think we got.
that's where
I think
experience
we-
comes into play right
Yeah.
there, so that's good.
I mean, I think this has what we're all seeking. I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone in the room, but I think at the end of the day, what the city would like to do, whether it's the McIntyre or the other 8 properties that might come in, is have sufficient control, might not be the right word, but management of what happens to those parcels. And what's important with the first change here is we don't have a conditional use permit right now. It's as of right, so it's in this weird space where they can opt in and do it, but we really can't say no. So this conditional use permit will give the planning board, in this case, being the permit granting authority, sufficient latitude, one hand on the wheel solidly, to say yes or no, have you met all the performance standards? The burden's on us to deny it, but the burden's also on them to show that they've met the performance standards as laid out in the code. So I think this will give us, without scaring off the party we're trying to bring in the door to do these kinds of benefits, because at the end of the day, this is still a voluntary conditional use permit. So we need that developer, he or she's got to come to the table and say, okay, let's talk about doing this, and they will talk to the planning board about it. And we're moving from 20% to 50, which is a huge leap, or something thereabouts. And we're also saying, you know, in what I've drafted in here is some specificity about the types. Remember, there are 13 and there'll be 16 if this gets adopted. Well, we're not looking for all of them at the same rate. We don't need a greenway here. We don't need a big park on most of these parcels. But we would like to see a plaza or a square. We'd like to see passageways, which we currently don't have clearly spelled out. We'd like to see maybe an arcade. And do it in, as you said earlier about the workforce, in a prorated scale. So if you only have an acre like the Citizen Bank, you don't have to create something as big as we're thinking about on something like the McIntyre that's twice the size. But ultimately, the planning board is going to have the same discretion, both under the conditional use permit that's new, but also under the existing language, to work with the applicant to determine the location and the type of each of the community spaces that go into the project, to make sure it's a good fit based on what's going on around it. Citizen Bank is a very different context than the McIntyre in relation to Market Square and economic activity. So I would expect the planning board and the applicant to choose different community space types in those two locations, because the surrounding context is so different. So we need to be flexible, but at the same time, what I was trying to do here with this draft is make sure we're indicating very clearly to the marketplace with something like a McIntyre project, one of these large parcels, that these are the kinds of amenities the city would like to see here, rather than a pocket park or something that's really disconnected from all the work we've done in relation to properties within an eighth of a mile of Market Square. So that that's a lot of discussion, but that, on community space, but that's the first stick, if you will. We haven't talked about the carrots. The second stick is the workforce housing. And again, I put this in here for discussion, but if a developer or an applicant decides to take the Citizen Bank or St. John's parking lot because they sell it, or the McIntyre property, and wants to do a larger footprint, wants to do a taller building, and they come in under this conditional use permit, we've just discussed what they need to do with the community space stick. The other stick is the workforce housing. If there's housing in the project, they'd have to give us 10% workforce housing, or at least 3 units, so there's that scalable piece somewhat. If it's for sale, and 5% if it's for rental, so it's not a lot of workforce housing, but it's something, because today we have nothing. And my fear is, if we ask for too much on workforce housing, we will not be able to sustain the 50% community space, because in an urban environment where a lot of these parcels are, they're not along the North Mill Pond, they are downtown, they're going to have more, they're probably going to have more expensive improvements that need to take place in the community spaces they create. And think of the brick market and the alleyways that are around it. That's high quality, expensive space. And again, all this for a developer comes down to numbers at the end of the day, not goodwill, maybe for some, but it's all about the math and the balance sheet. So as a placeholder, we have a new stick that's not there today, and it's workforce housing. It's 10% if you're doing for sale units, it's 5% if you're doing rental. And if you're not doing housing in the project, I've italicized the language here because I've had some discussions with the legal department. We need to make sure this third option is supported by the RSA and the state statutes in respect to an in lieu payment, which is what I talked about a few minutes ago. If you were doing a project at Citizen Bank or the McIntyre and you didn't want any housing, there was no, as a developer, if they came before us and said, well, I'm not doing any housing, so I really don't want to do workforce housing because housing isn't part of my program. The idea with this third subset of workforce housing is they would make an in lieu payment to something like the Affordable Housing Trust or whatever we have established here in the city, or should establish, to manage workforce housing initiatives beyond this committee and the city council on a day-to-day basis. And this would create a funding source for the off chance somebody comes in at the Citizen Bank and says, yeah, I want to do something here, an office building, and I want the incentive, and I'll give you your community space, but I'm not doing any housing. So, it's a hardship for me as an applicant that you're going to force me to do housing when housing's not in my program. So this would be an ability for them to opt out and make an in lieu payment, and I put as a placeholder $10 per square foot of the new construction. As an example, if you looked at the McIntyre project and looked at the new square footage that was envisioned in the community plan, that would be about an $800,000 payment using $10 a square foot that would go into the Affordable Housing Trust. Again, placeholder, conversation, but to me, I put it in because it seemed like everybody should pay their fair share. Whether it meets the state statute or not, we have to give the legal department an opportunity to review that, and I'm sure if we can find out how to do it successfully, we'll keep it if people want to keep it, but it may need to be amended or removed pending that review, because I don't know that we've found yet any other community in New Hampshire that has done that. But to me, that doesn't mean we don't try to do it. We need to explore the feasibility of doing it. But that's why it's in there. That's why I italicized the text, and there is a footnote. Before I go to the carrots, does anybody want to talk about that stick? Do you understand was I understandable?
Yeah, no, I think it's great.
Okay.
And we do have a housing trust. It just has no money in
I
it.
thought so.
Unfunded.
Unfunded.
So
Unfunded,
you know.
2017 restarted.
And realistically, if we look at all the projects that have been approved, the 10 or 11 that have gone through these incentives in the last 7 or 8 years, outside of the brick market, all of them have housing. So this is going to be sparingly used, this little italicized question mark. Almost everybody. The money downtown is above the ground floor. It's not the bottom. So that's why everybody's doing housing downtown, is because that's where the profits are. There's a huge incentive to do it. So there will be housing I believe there'll continue to be a lot of housing. But you could have a hotel come in and they're not housing, and they would not, that would be an example of somebody that, in my mind, should pay their fair share, but they're not doing housing units that are for sale or for rent, other than through the hotel, just
Like-
as an example.
Like the Rockingham Meals and Rooms tax?
Who?
Like the meals and rooms tax that we don't collect?
Okay, I don't know. Yeah, got me there. Out of my wheelhouse. So I'm just going to jump through real quick the rest of this. The building footprint I already talked about. I took probably a soft approach to dealing with the community space areas that sit on top of parking structures or basements that shouldn't be penalized for that, regardless of where they are. These are the 3 new types, and images, I would create images to go with these, that if you look at the 13 that are already in the code, the parks, the playgrounds, that they have little pictures, illustrations, we would get those made. But this is for a pedestrian passageway, so if you think, we don't have any, to my knowledge, in Portsmouth, but if you think of downtown Newburyport and you go up State Street, there are all these little tunnels that take you to In Street, and they're really cool. The McIntyre project envisioned 2 of those, going in from Bow Street into the Market Hall, from the Market Hall into the Winter Garden. So, again, you don't have to do these if you're here, but it would be nice if we could do them in certain instances. The same with the last one, which is the arcade, which is like 4664 Maplewood, where you take a chunk out of the ground floor. I mean, this is a great way with the arcades to create outdoor dining, again, without eating into the sidewalk or taking parking off the street because you don't have enough room to do it. And the middle one there is the public observation deck. That'll probably rarely get done, but we did look at the McIntyre at having public space on the roof of a building and getting the public from the sidewalk to the top and having an easement to use that space. I think I amended this a little bit because we had, I don't know where it is in the permitting process, but the Martingale came in to expand their deck. And they created, as part of the permitting, I don't know where it is in terms of construction, or there were some issues with the neighbors that they were litigating. But when it got approved by the city, there was a public observation deck area over the water on the back of Bow Street, and that would be, in my mind, a clear example of good community space that we should insert into the code. So that's all I'm trying to do here, is create 3 new definitions for community space types. Anybody have any questions about those?
Can we make the public observation deck ADA compliant?
Well, it will be if it has to be. I don't know,
When would it
the
not
reason
have to
I
be?
say I don't know is because there may be an instance where something exists that may not be, and we might want to make it. Obviously, that's the goal. But the good news is, if it has to be, it has to be, and it doesn't matter what you write in here. They got to get a building permit. If it has to be ADA compliant under the law, that they're going to do it.
The only reason I make the statement is because the original observation deck on Martingale Wharf was pretty much not ADA compliant without entering private property, and that was a public access point.
Well, then I would say I'd be afraid to make it required to be ADA, because if they don't have property rights to cross another private property, then we'll never get it.
Aren't these community spaces?
Well, they are community spaces, but if you've got a situation where you have an access issue on an abutting property, I mean, I don't know the details of that, but the bottom line is, if you're going to create a new public space, it has to be ADA compliant. You would insert that language on every one of these then.
Okay.
Because new spaces have to be ADA compliant.
It's just that the public observation deck is the only one that falls within or on the interior of a development.
And
All
it
of the
would-
other ones can be accessed from an existing public place.
These have to have public access from the right-of-way all the way to the roof if you're on a roof, and it has to be ADA compliant. That's a code requirement.
Okay.
We can talk more about whether
Yeah, I
we
don't
need to
wanna-
insert that, but it
I
would
just know
likely...
that it was brought up initially with the Martingale extension as well.
Yeah.
And because there was at least 2 community members that made that point, and so we want to make sure that it's in there.
So I want to belabor the point.
No,
but
of course.
If the Martingale doesn't meet ADA, for example, because of something like you're suggesting, they don't have rights on an abutting property to get somebody there, then it wouldn't count as community space, but you'd still want to have, you'd still take half an apple and then figure out how to make that work out in the future, but not through this program.
All good.
Yeah, it wouldn't qualify if it doesn't have ADA.
Nick, it occurred to me, as you're talking about the community spaces, and especially now that there's 16 of them, I'm not for complicating ordinances anywhere, but as we're looking at the downtown where it's more complicated and sophisticated anyway, I think there should at least be a hierarchy of preferred community spaces in the downtown out of the 16 that the planning board could choose from. I mean, I'd even prefer to see a rank, because certain small spaces like Commercial Alley aren't large, but they're very well done and special, versus, if that same space was just a straight shot with no windows, no, just a paved
Yeah.
cut through.
Right.
It shouldn't qualify as much ground. So I just wonder if there's a way to.
Here's my suggestion.
Okay.
I think you leave it the way it is, because, and not to defend the way it is. What's going to give you and the city and the planning board, unlike today, where you don't have a conditional use permit unless you're doing parking under the building or behind a liner building. Everything else is as of right. So your hands are behind your back, because you really don't have anything but site plan approval and a bully pulpit to negotiate the ranking on a site-by-site basis what you think is appropriate. Clearly, on Rains Ave, the priority isn't an alleyway, it's the greenway. I mean, at least it was for the community. So, and it's in the character district. So we have this tremendous spectrum of value areas, right? If you're off Market Square, you want Commercial Alley. If you're on Green Street, not so much. That I feel comfortable, if we get to a conditional use permit, the planning board has one solid hand on the wheel with the applicant to negotiate the appropriate community space out of that 16, however they're ordered. They're not ordered, they're there. You guys have the ability to figure out what's the right fit for that property, because otherwise then we almost have to go through each sub-neighborhood in the character districts and recalibrate the order, because they're so different. Whether you're on Court Street at the Portsmouth Housing Authority is not like the McIntyre. So I think the conditional use permit, which is absent today, is going to give you and the board.
I hear your point, and I don't want to complicate things, but it would also be more fair to the applicant if there was a list of maybe the top 5. It would also help the planning board, because if you're having a conversation with the applicant at the meeting, and they are proposing this, but some people think it ought to be that, if that is higher on the list of.
Let's
talk about it.
Administrative rank.
It's very reactive, and by the time they're presenting to us at the lectern, those plans and those engineered site documents cost so much money that if we would go and try to change it to a prioritized community space, that could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Well, that's why you have a preliminary consultation and a design review, which, again, I will tell you, when you don't have a conditional use permit, don't underestimate how weak that of a position that puts you in, right? So why would you come in and talk to the planning board? They're doing the preliminary conceptual and design review simply to freeze the code, not really to get much input, because everything is typically as of right. So it's putting you guys back on your heels right at the beginning. If you have a conditional use permit, anybody with half a brain is going to be cautious as to whether they're going to get those added footprint and volume. And you guys are going to be, you're on the board, so I'm saying you guys, the planning board, I would expect is going to be a little more strident in its jurisdiction when it has a conditional use permit versus not. And I'll tell you, it'll take like one application where somebody follows maybe what you're envisioning, which is they come in with a baked project and they're stuffing it down your throat and it's expensive to redesign it to meet your collective priorities. That'll happen once, and the message will be back out in the market the next day when it doesn't work, that's not how it works anymore. There's a conditional use permit, and you better come in with your ears on and open, because the planning board is going to talk about the ranking and the appropriateness of these community spaces early in the process. the marketplace is pretty responsive to how we respond as regulators. And usually there's only one failure at the front end, perhaps, where they make a dumb move thinking nothing's changed or they weren't paying attention. But the word gets out. If you guys want to really drill down on these community spaces, they'll know that, and they'll come in and get your input, and then you'll be able to calibrate, what happens on Market Square versus what happens at the bridge or out at Haymarket Square, which are totally different contexts, all within the same character district area. The Baptist Church just can't be compared to the McIntyre. So your rankings are going to be very different.
I think that aspect could be something we deal with later when we're taking the deeper dive into all of this.
I was thinking the same thing.
For this, let's just.
But I get what you're saying. And
Just tell
I
me to
think-
stop talking.
I was trying. It's hard to stop you, Nick.
I think it's an administrative list that's even internal and public, and say this is where we as a planning board rank things. So while you're preparing,
I think the three of us could talk about that all day
Yeah, I'd
long
love to-
because
I'd love to hear
it is something that I
move
When we
on.
do that.
I certainly
We just
value,
have to
so.
be careful about having it completely arbitrary. That's my only concern. That's not fair to the applicants.
Fair.
So
But I-
Fair point.
let's get into the weeds later.
Yeah.
Yeah, deeper, right? Okay, so the last suggested amendment for discussion, that's more specific. So that's out of the incentives. We left the incentives when we left the carrots and sticks. When we just talked about the three community space types, that's generic to the whole. It's not just parcels over 1 acre, that everybody would be able to utilize those additional three uses, whether they're in the 1 acre or not. So sorry to make that point now. But what we just discussed would apply to all of the downtown in terms of having 16 choices instead of 13. So this last piece of the proposed amendment, this is targeted specifically at the McIntyre property at the bottom of Bow Street. The McIntyre property today, just zooming down to get a look, if you can see the screen or what's in front of you. The McIntyre property, if you look at my mouse, and I should have highlighted the property. You see the mouse? Yeah. This is the property here. So this is the old City Hall over here. This is Chapel Street, and the church is up here, St. John's. This is all private property. So this big block on this 2/3 of the larger block is the McIntyre property. The building height map for the CD5, which is this portion of the property, it's split zone. This little, about 1/4 of the property is CD5 and 3/4 is CD4. The green line allows 3 stories and 40 feet as a baseline building height right now for the McIntyre as well as City Hall. Anybody that's green here is 3 stories or 40 feet. The orange line at the bottom is 3 stories, a short fourth, which is a compressed fourth floor, a little bit shorter, similar to some of the buildings across the road, or 45 feet. So it's a 5-foot increase, and again, that's based on the fact that the buildings across the road, the Martingale all the way down to Ceres Street, the average building height is closer to 45 feet than 40 feet over there. Some of the buildings are 4.5, almost 5 stories on this side of the street, and there's 6 or 7 stories on the river. But when you look at the building wall along Bow Street, it's in the mid-40s, and some buildings exceed that, so 45 was chosen. It's recognizing Daniel Street is a very different context than Bow Street. Even though it's only 5 feet here, Daniel is probably closer to 36 feet than 40 as an average height. So there's a significant difference when you, other than the McIntyre that sticks out like a sore thumb, both the short portion and the tall, most of this is a shorter context than here. Well, we're talking 5 feet. What I forgot to talk about with the incentives for properties over 1 acre, we talked about the sticks, the community space, and the workforce housing. What I skipped over, unfortunately, and the conditional use permit, you could construe as a stick because it's as of right today. The carrots are what I talked about, allowing a bigger building footprint than what's allowed today, so we could achieve something similar to what we wanted to achieve in the community plan, whichever version you want, last year's, this year's. They still don't meet the building footprint requirements as envisioned. You would also be able to get an extra 5 feet in height. Right now, you can do 1 story or 10 feet in the code. So what I'm suggesting we do is 1 story or 15 feet. And that would allow something like a mezzanine, which we envisioned in the project, because the site is sloping down to Bow Street from Daniel. There needs to be a little, and we've learned this not just from this exercise, the McIntyre. When they built the brick market, they had issues with the mechanicals fitting in to each of the floor-to-ceiling heights with the mechanicals above it. The building heights that we adopted in 2013, 14, and 15 for the form-based coding appear to be very tight, and they're driving up construction costs for that 2 or 3 feet that they could have put the utilities in a cheaper manner between the ceiling of the floor and the floor above it. I'm suggesting we go from 10 to 15 feet with the conditional use permit as a carrot to an applicant, and as an offset, lower the underlying height from 45 to 40, so it's a wash for the area on Bow Street. So that, there's no real magic and it's creating more of an incentive to get somebody that eventually redevelops this property to come to the planning board seeking a conditional use permit, to get the added story or 15 feet, and get the added building footprint in order to give us what we're looking for, which is extensive, high-quality community space and some workforce housing or a payment in lieu. So that was the thought here with that end of the site.
Well done.
Thank you, Nick.
Are there questions? You're done listening to me.
An overall, I guess, question for the committee or observation. I mean, we're spending a lot of time looking at the downtown, where I don't think there are that many opportunities. Would we be better served looking at closer at, say, the Gateway District, where things are working, and there's probably a lot more opportunity to create affordable housing there? I don't know, I mean, if you develop the rest of the downtown, what would we get for affordable housing?
Yeah.
How many units?
I quickly would say,
30?
the agenda has that as the next agenda item, number one.
Right.
And you're not wrong. I would suggest 95% of our opportunity is outside the downtown.
Yeah.
But the Land Use Committee, we're not solely here just for workforce housing. We're here for a number of things. That is a core function, but it's not unimportant for us to address some of the defects we've already got downtown in respect to the fact that we produce zero. Other than the Housing Authority doing their own gig. We have, the one incentive was used by them to make that project economically viable, so you might be able to argue they wouldn't have been able to do that project without the extra story, and these incentives gave them the vehicle to get there. But your point is well taken. But we need to look at both. Clearly, this is also an effort to look at the timing situation for large parcels and position the city in the best place.
For the McIntyre, I
So,
understand.
I'm hopeful we're not going to be sitting here for months on end talking about this particular amendment. We're going to shift gears after I'm done talking, go into Gateway, and the next few meetings or mini meetings are going to be Gateway focused.
I just hope people don't think that because of the tweaking that we're doing, that all of a sudden we're going to have hundreds of units of affordable housing in the downtown when
We won't.
it's probably impossible.
Yeah.
It's not the idea behind what this is about.
So thanks for asking that, but that is
That's our
absolutely
longer,
correct.
that's our longer, deeper dive that we're going to do once we have a consultant and we start to look at the incentives through the whole city. All right, you're done?
Checking me out? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it to Pete.
We are going to move
You're
on
leaving?
to,
I'm leaving, but I'm going to call in for my hour drive.
okay.
I'm going to give you my
So you-
seat I just uploaded.
Next on the agenda is going to be our continued discussion and report from the planning staff on the review of our city-owned properties
I got
for
that.
use of workforce or multifamily housing. That's actually
God, you're
next.
not done with me.
I'm not quite done with you. I'm just moving you to a new thing. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry to be so long-winded. So I pulled up Peter's
You expected it.
presentation. You expected it. All right, good.
I would say thorough.
Wait, I have that here, right? Yeah, it's on. Sorry, guys. I thought I was done. Here it is.
That's the agenda.
Sorry, Gateway and mixed-use districts, is that where we're at?
No, we're doing the.
The
we're doing
report back to the
city-owned-
city.
The report. So I'm going to be quicker. A couple of meetings ago, we were asked as a group, you asked the group.
Hold
What?
on one
No?
second. Question?
Yeah, so the presentation and those red line changes, what is the
Oh,
next
yeah,
step?
action.
Is there an action of the?
Thank you, Jane.
I think that our review is done. I think we need to send it back to city council, who can refer it to planning board. And I will work with legal, because I know they're still reviewing the last legal aspect as to the, whether or not we can do payments in lieu, but
Do you want to hear any public comment on that? I think some people would like to say something.
I don't think we have time to do it 3 times, so I'll hear public comment towards the end, but that's, I
Okay,
think, the initial
okay.
plan. I would like to get through all of our stuff before we do that.
So the understanding would be, if I heard it right, this would get referred by this committee to the council.
Who refers it then to
To
planning?
planning board, there'd be a public hearing at the planning board
And
and
then
a
it would
public
go-
hearing at the city council. And we'll obviously work with the legal department.
First,
you know,
to
maybe
figure
a
out
few
the
of us, to make sure we've got it right when we trot it out. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, we don't actually take votes, we just come to a conclusion. We try to move things along.
Is everybody good with that, though? I mean, it's pretty.
That's good.
All right, we will move on to the review
Okay. So,
and admit Joanne.
oh, good, yeah.
She has an hour's drive, she's gonna listen in.
All right. I'll try and be brief here. A couple of meetings ago, it came up that, you know, there had been this long list of city-owned properties that was evaluated initially with some of the planning staff, and I know Beth and others in City Hall had looked at that list. I don't remember how many properties are on that, maybe 195 I got written at the
Started-
bottom.
yeah.
So what I did with Howard and Peter Stith and Peter Britz is look at that list, and my initial pass independently was to take anything off that list that was under 1 acre, for the most part. I know I've got one on there that's .9 up at Falkland next to the Housing Authority. But to me, like to Bob's point, you know, if there are little properties out there that are a half acre, a quarter acre, could you potentially use those for workforce housing, which was what I was understanding. We were looking at these simply for feasibility or suitability as being reused adaptively or with new development as workforce housing or multifamily, typically housing developments. So that was the understanding I brought to my own personal analysis, was that I wasn't going to go out there, there's too many on here to go visit all the properties and say, okay, where can we fit one house? Where can we fit a duplex? That seemed to me to be really inefficient, and to your point, Bob, it's not going to result in a whole lot of housing production to look at these very tiny parcels, at least initially. Doesn't mean there isn't something out there that I missed that is a golden opportunity for a duplex, but that's not going to really move the needle much in the city. What I understood the instructions were, hey, we got all these properties, let's look at the larger ones and let's see if there are opportunities. Again, without it being conclusive, this is a high-level preliminary analysis. We are not engineers that have gone out and done the geotechnical or the soil analysis to see what the feasibility is. But let's go visit, I developed a short list with Howard, and we went out to 11 properties, looking at the criteria generally that are on the screen, using the mapping software, which is imperfect in relation to wetlands and vernal pools, and topography and rocky outcrops and vistas and views, all the stuff that's really critical to see and experience before you make a judgment on whether something should even remain on a short list. So we went out and we looked at 11 properties and walked them, and it became very clear to at least Howard and I, who were on the most of the walks together, that there were only 2 or 3 properties that lended themselves potentially to anything of substance from a housing standpoint. So I just want to quickly, I haven't changed anything in the letter. The handout, simply some supporting data. The 3 properties that again, this is just an opinion. It's not the finished product of the city. This is largely 2 or 3 staff people in planning doing what I just said, going out and looking at the properties and bringing this out for further discussion and further study. Not saying you got to do this here, but it looked to us like somebody had mentioned from the public looking at the lower City Hall parking lot, which has got the 2 levels of parking. I know the police station's looking at that site. People have looked at that site for many years for many different things, including housing. It's potentially appropriate to do something there other than the parking lot. So it makes sense to us that it be on the list. We're not suggesting it be definitely used for workforce housing or housing at all. But it's certainly a site that would lend itself, given its surrounding context, given its existing conditions, and how it rates up against what are typical site suitability factors that are listed there. It's not an inappropriate place to take to the next level if somebody wanted to do that. That's what this means. The second one is Falkland Way, which is, again, it's about an acre. And there may be problems with these properties we're not yet aware of. And, we don't know where all the easements are. We don't know everything about, because we haven't had the time to drill down through every constraint that every property might have. The Falkland Way property the city owns is about an acre, and it's on 2 sides of a driveway coming in, or a street, to the Portsmouth Housing Authority that has some type of housing. I don't know if it's senior housing. I don't know what's in it. But it's a big lawn area in front. There are some garden areas that somebody's put there in the open field. And then there's a tree line buffer. And, these images are shown in the back. I'm not going to belabor it for the interest of time. But you could probably, maybe, do some degree of additional housing on that 3/4 of an acre that's open across the road from the Portsmouth Housing Authority. But that's as far as we got. Again, somebody might come to the table and say, well, no, there's 4 constraints you guys don't know about that knock it off the list. But visually and looking at the maps, it seemed like it was an appropriate place to look at. So the Lister Academy at the Sherburne School, Road School, it's 5 acres. It clearly has potential to be adaptively reused, at least the school for sure that's there. If the city is going to vacate that school, something, I'll speak maybe for myself, I would hate to see myself, the school disappear and, either become a lawn, a parking lot, or something even else. I have a hard time believing something better would go there than the building that's there. The building may be tired inside, but it's got a lot of character to me. I think it does to Howard. We were the ones that went there. So just because it's on the list here doesn't mean the whole site has to get redeveloped with multifamily housing. All I'm saying is that site definitely makes sense. It's specifically the building that's there. If the city is going to vacate that building, I would definitely hope the city advocates somebody reuse the building. What it gets reused for is not for me to say, but would housing be suitable inside that school? I've been inside it. I haven't attended any of the meetings, whatever the housing authority's doing, but I did a walk through the school. It lends itself to me very well for multifamily housing. If somebody wanted to take the classrooms and make a unit out of each classroom, that's pretty easy to do. I've seen it done in many places. So at a minimum, the school itself, to us, lends itself potentially to a multifamily housing development, regardless of who does it and how many units are in it or how much workforce is there. That wasn't our charge. It's just, is it suitable? It has the parking, it has the square footage. The gym could be split into 2 levels. The gym could stay a really interesting community space. Who knows? It's got a lot of opportunity, despite the constraints of being an old, tired building. Somebody, I'm convinced, with this zip code could make the investment to make that into really good housing, whether it's workforce, a combination, or market rate housing. It's a good facility. What happens on the softball field in the back? It's challenging, but it's certainly possible to do something there. And there, as everyone knows, there's a whole raft of questions that come out of that. Well, where's the field go? And do the girls that use the field have a place to go? That's a question. How do you get in there? How many units are there? Where's the traffic going? How much is the traffic? That's not what this was about for us, but it's certainly not impossible that somebody could do something there. It's all about what. and how much. And that's really where we landed. And importantly, for the other 8 properties we walked, because we went, I have a list. This is what I added. And I was really reticent to put numbers in a matrix because I hate that. People start, even myself, nitpicking the numbers. Well, why'd you take a 1 instead of a 2? So this is not where I started. This is almost backfilled from our minds, to create some kind of ranking. But we looked at those factors. It's sideways on the screen, but you can see it in your page. Don't get too hung up on the numbers that are in there, because at the end of the day, 8 of those properties that we looked at did not lend themselves to us at all for housing or anything other than what they already are. And they're largely active recreational facilities or just awesome city parks waiting to happen, like the Sagamore Creek, whatever it's called behind the high school. That is one of the most phenomenal resources I didn't even know existed till I walked that property with the landfill in the middle. It is phenomenal. And I think what's exciting for Portsmouth, and you all live here, is you've got these great properties that the city's been almost land banking for decades and putting no money into because they either haven't had it or they haven't focused on it, that can become these phenomenal parks and conservation areas and wildlife habitat areas with trails. So everywhere I went, if you look at the maps, the mistake that I like many people make is looking at a map from the top down and saying, oh, wow, that looks like it's a big property, and the wetland boundary says there's a lot of uplands. But when you get out there and you see all the ledge and you see the mature trees and you see the vernal pool, you see the stone walls, you see the views and vistas, the stuff you can't see from straight down from the sky, it becomes apparent housing or any other human use of that beyond walking trails is inappropriate. So I think most of the land that's on this list, the 195, that's of a sufficient quantity to support, at least optically, something happening is really not suitable for not just multifamily housing, not single-family housing, not parking, not commercial. So that's what we took away from the exercise. The city is not going to solve, so the bottom line is, the city properties are not going to solve the workforce housing problems, in my opinion, of the city. And importantly, what I added to this, just to start a conversation, so these are all the places we went.
Properties.
Yeah, when we're out there looking at all these properties, we're noticing all these other opportunities more suitable to our eyes, and we might be wrong and it's incomplete information, but there's almost 80 acres of parcels that we did look at in a similar fashion while we're out there looking at the ones we were targeting. And if there were 80 acres, and this is developable acres, not the size of the parcel, if there were 80 acres and you just applied the minimum multifamily densities that you see anywhere of 20 units per acre, you got 1,600 housing units at a minimum in these parcels to 2,000, to 2,500. So there's ample supply. These are all privately held, and these people may not want to do anything in the zone. These are all outside the gateway, too. These are not parcels. I don't think any of them are in the gateway. I could be wrong. But there are opportunities that we need to explore moving forward as we talk about the gateway and we talk about maybe expanding the gateway to allow some of these parcels to be potentially utilized, because everything in the gateway, everything, as we all know in zoning outside of the municipal district, is privately owned. So it's not ours to choose other than to enable through the zoning what could happen. Sorry. Yeah. Done.
Thank you. Does any committee members have any questions?
I just wanted to reinforce what Nick spoke about. Getting the list of properties, this was just a top-level, high-elevation assessment. It wasn't getting into the engineering that could actually happen on the properties. It was a visual assessment, because you need to start somewhere. You need to start sorting through these properties. And so our findings are opinions. They're not necessarily factual. This can happen here. And then the input comes later on from more scientific, the studies, easements, and things like that, as well as the public. So this is just the first step of a multi-step approach to understanding the best fit, best use of properties. And I'll also reinforce what was stated. discovery that happened during these visits was these other resources that exist around the city that we went to go look at the park, and there's some forgotten facilities underneath the bridge, and there's little areas that can be found.
Yeah.
That,
Amazing.
Yeah, that.
Under the bridge is the dog park.
Yeah, and there's.
It's been walled up, fenced off, the courts in there.
Yeah, because I know that was
They-
unusable for a little bit while they were working on the bridge.
Because of the construction on the bridge, they had to wall that off until
Yeah.
that was done. We're waiting for the state to release it.
Yeah, I know that's got a lot
Like a
of
lot of
potential.
things, yeah.
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 So there's, and also with the private ownership, where the discovery that's happened is going to start fueling some other ideas about what could happen, not only for housing, but also for the public benefits. And with this first sort of this initial data set, okay, we've got these 11, it's gone down to 3. Yeah, so later on, there's going to be study that needs to happen about these other 1 or 2 acre parcels, and you start tying in what happens down in Massachusetts with the Conservation Preservation Act, where there's a certain taxation that happens, and there's a funding of Affordable Housing Trust. The trust can then evolve into potentially helping support development of these half acres. So as you start getting into townhouse development, you can create 4 units in these other smaller areas, but we're starting with the larger areas.
So I just want to note, when you look at the images, you see, this is in Panaway Manor, a 4.3 acre parcel that was on the 11 list, again, because of just looking top down at the size of the parcel. And yeah, okay. So when you see the hyphen and what's written behind it, that's what our opinion was as to probably the highest and best use of the property, that it wasn't suitable, this particular property. They're all the same. I just wanted to point out, if you read the document, you see passive recreation and conservation, what's that mean? That's what we felt, again, just doing the site visit for any of these, would be the expected use of the property in the present and in the future, that it wasn't suitable for multifamily housing for any number of reasons.
It's actually under conservation.
Well, this has conservation. There's over $2.5 million of grant money that went in to purchase this. This would have been suitable from an environmental from a site suitability standpoint, but it's got easements all over it from NOAA and the city, so that's why it dropped to a low rating on the list. There's the Panaway Manor. I should have done this. There's the one at Panaway Manor. Sorry, at Falkland Road.
Falkland Road.
And this is the area, that seemed to make some sense, if at all, for doing additional housing rather than along the back of the properties on this abutting street. I can't remember the name.
Laurel Court.
Thank you, Laurel Court. The lower lots in the City Hall. There's the Lister Academy and the Sherburne School. This one fell off immediately. It's full of wetlands and buffer and has the development. This is an awesome property I never even knew existed, going in off Harvard into the well and the pond and the water treatment, whatever, the well out there with the water treatment. And the forest trail, really cool, but totally inaccessible and environmentally sensitive. I mean, people could have other opinions on these, and we welcome that. I know you want to move, but just finish scrolling up here. The Granite, is it Granite Ave? Yes.
That's 25 Granite Ave.
Yeah. I mean, I know this has been looked at by a number of opportunities, including the police station. It just seemed to us to be a really formal, active recreational facility with a lot of amenities and infrastructure already in here. So it didn't seem like a natural fit. Now there's land down here that's uplands and obviously moving down towards the church, the Catholic church, that's privately owned. That's more suitable if it was available. This one on Sagamore, it's big and there are a lot of uplands here up in this area, but there are a lot of wetlands within it. It didn't make any sense when we stood on the street and actually looked in and walked into that site. There are some trails on it. There's your prize waiting to happen. Is the the Sagamore Creek? What do you call it?
Jones Ave. That's
Yeah,
Jones
off
Ave.
Jones Ave. But
It's also the
I-
high school cross-country trail.
Yeah, and
Right
thank
near the
God they're
Elks.
in there grooming those trails, because it looks like a very well-used park, and it is by kids. And I would encourage anyone in the room to park on Jones Ave and go in and refamiliarize yourself with how awesome this space is. Because even the landfill, it might need a solar farm on it, but it's just phenomenal when you see the tide coming in and out. For me, it was. It looked, I was looking at this area from the sky thinking, wow, you could maybe do something in here. And I get there, and it's one of these tired parks that the city needs to maybe revisit. The chain link fence is horrible along here that's been there since the 70s at the top of the bank. And there's just a lot of opportunity, and this is a phenomenal neighborhood park, like so many. It's just a little tired. Okay.
Any other comments or questions? And I think we need to decide if this is ready to send back to City Council. They're the ones that asked for this report, for the record. If anybody forgot.
One thing, Craig's not here, so I can't ask him, maybe has the Housing Authority looked at redeveloping any of its properties, going up and
It's-
getting more dense? Is it
They
possible?
have looked at several of them, I know, in past years, yes.
Is there a report about that, or is it?
I don't know.
I think we
if there
should
was.
ask 'em.
We'd have to ask them if
And-
there was.
Seems like a lot, the fact that there's so few available sort of heightens the importance of possibly taking a peek at that
Right.
to see.
So I can, if this was what you wanted to put in the form of a report back to the council, I could add a footnote to that effect, because obviously, this isn't anybody, these private properties, that's an observation from us. And I don't want to suggest any of these folks want to do anything like this, but I think it's our charge to at least identify opportunities. That's what I understood we were doing, not saying this is where we need to go. We could add a footnote to the effect.
Is the
that-
zoning all good on those?
No,
parking?
they aren't. The zoning isn't, so we would need to look at it.
So be sure to make that note, because
Yeah.
you don't want to have a list with city endorsements saying it's potential for
All right,
that.
I'm going to add a footnote as a disclosure for this table too, and that footnote will also speak to the Housing Authority and our seeking of information from them about potential redevelopment.
I think it's just we now need the council to probably come back and give us more direction as to where they want us to go from here. That's what I'm thinking. We've kind of done the initial work, and we've delved down a list and let them see all the work that's been done and say, what do you want your next steps to be to move forward? Don't you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think we're all in agreement. What I want to avoid is maybe what Rick is saying, confusion or misunderstanding as to, you didn't ask us to do table 2, so I don't want to leave it on here unstrapped
Right.
with
We
parameters.
probably should take it off. I mean, there are a lot of privately owned properties, so I saw many of them on my initial delve into this, but I think because they're private properties, we really probably should take that off the report.
Yeah, because it's an
City Council.
endorsement, and if
Yeah.
the zoning doesn't fit, that could cause a problem.
Right.
It doesn't, definitely. Okay, so I'm going to remove, I'm glad we talked
Yeah.
about it.
Any other discussion on that before we move on to our last presentation, before we can open up public comment? I think we're ready to move on. Nick gets out of the hot seat. We are going to now do a general discussion and a presentation regarding the gateway zoning districts, so that we can begin to familiarize ourselves more with those incentives and where everything sits now as we start to take our deeper dive into all of the changes that we want to make.
I just have to leave at 10:45. I just want to give you a heads up.
That's fine.
I'm gonna
Sorry,
go
we
at
take-
11.
Sometimes we take more time than we're supposed to. And Peter will take us away.
All right, let me just see. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Peter Stith. I'm the planning manager in the planning department. And as you continued your discussion on incentives, you'd requested just kind of an overview of the existing gateway zoning. Just trying to see if I can, well, I might have to, I had some notes, but I think I can wing it.
Do you want to share it on Zoom?
Oh, yes. Is it not?
It's not, because our little window has us in it, right?
Let's,
There we go.
Would it take me 5 minutes?
That's why you're sitting over here.
all right.
Now you're sharing. Good.
Okay, so the gate.
Press the little
Yeah.
button and just minimize that. There you go. Perfect. I will be quiet now.
All right.
City of Portsmouth is talking.
Let me move this. All right. So the Gateway mixed-use districts, just backing up to the last master plan, and just to kind of give some background on how these were developed. There was a lot of public comment on looking outside of the downtown to create look for other areas where we can improve, where we'll create more housing, and use some of these existing commercial districts to create mixed-use districts. So they looked at, part of the master plan talks about corridor areas and the vision behind development of these corridor areas. On the right, there's some exhibits from the master plan to show how we could take some of these old commercial areas that typically have parking in the front and buildings in the back and kind of recreate them to allow for mixed use and more pedestrian oriented places. And out of that, we created the Gateway. There was an existing Gateway zone. From that, we created two Gateways districts, the Gateway Corridor and the Gateway Center. This is the main corridor on Route 1, and then Market Street extension here. So the Gateway Corridor is mainly on Lafayette Road and Route 1 bypass, and also includes outer Woodbury Avenue. And then the Gateway Center districts are on Marona Road, and as I mentioned, the Market Street extension. And I'll show you some of the examples. These areas, these parcels that are highlighted in blue represent projects that have come before us. This is the West End Yards down here. This is the Connect Church, where there's a project. It's held up in court, but that's a 21 or 24 unit apartment building. And then moving further down Route 1, we have, this is behind Five Guys, the 1400 Lafayette project, where initially it was 53 units. Now they've reduced it down to 32. They're going to be starting soon. And then further down, we have Cinemagic, the Viridian on this parcel. And then further down, we have a couple other projects, the Wren's Nest Hotel was redeveloped, as well as a condo development off of, which is now going to be called Juniper Lane. So just kind of more of an overview of the Gateway District. There are building types and development sites. So if you're going to develop a single parcel with a single building, you have a building type that you can choose from, and the ones that have an asterisk were added to the ones that were already created in the Character District Zoning, Article 5A. So when this was adopted, they added these other building types. So if you're just going to build one apartment building on a site, you could do that, and they have criteria for development standards. If you're just going to develop an apartment building, say, you have the setbacks, height requirements, number of dwellings per building. Same would be for, like, if you were going to do a live-work building, you have the development dimensional standards for those. But if you're going to have a development, and so we've only seen maybe a couple of those. Most of the development in the Gateway has been a development site where you have multiple principal buildings, commercial and residential. And for that, you have development site criteria. There are four types of development sites: mixed use, general residence, general commercial, and a pocket neighborhood development. And the criteria for development sites talk about buffer, site width, site depth, which can expand over multiple parcels. But the underlying building types that go on the development sites have to still adhere to those standards for each building type. So this is the table for development sites. It talks about buffers, there are open space and community space types, which is next on the slide. If you're doing a single building type on a single parcel, you do not have to have community space. And unlike in what Nick was talking about in the character districts, where community space is an incentive, in the Gateway, community space for a development site is a requirement. And when this zoning was adopted, we added some additional types, and it looks like we might be adding a few more to this list. But these with the asterisk were added during the when this zoning was adopted in 2017. Yeah, so in the Gateway 1 district, for a development site, you have to have 10% of the site be designated as community space. And in the Gateway Center District G2, you have to have 20% of the development site. And this is a zoning requirement. It's not part of an incentive. For density, for a building type, we have a table that has dwelling units per acre. So if you're going to do an apartment building, by right, you can have 16 units per acre. And with a conditional use permit, you can go up to 24 units per acre.
Can you just briefly define the difference between live, work, and mixed use?
Live work would be you live in that's a single building, and so you would live like upstairs, and then you work downstairs.
In a formal office?
It could be an office or a store, but your business, your studio, your business would be downstairs.
Personally?
Yep.
Got it. Got it. Sorry.
Right, and then mixed use obviously is.
So, Peter?
Yes.
Is live work mean the commercial portion of your dwelling unit is in your dwelling unit, or you're just somehow tethering the dwelling units above the ground floor to the commercial space on the ground floor through deed restrictions?
Well, no, I think it's the first one.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, you actually live in the unit that you're working in.
right.
Kittery has that. Chinburg
Just want to be
did a
clear on
recent
that.
development
Yeah.
like that in Kittery.
Yeah.
And so the mixed-use building will be residential above and unrelated commercial below. So for development types, or development sites, excuse me, the dwelling unit per acre is slightly higher. You have, so for a residential development, you can by right have 20 units per acre, and through a conditional use permit, you can go up to 36 units per acre. And they're the same across the board in G1 and G2. The only difference is the pocket neighborhood density. So looking at incentives in the Gateway District, and these are all through conditional use permit, you can go up to a max of 36 units per building. You can increase the dwelling units per acre, and you can also increase height and building footprint. And whereas in the character districts, you can choose between community space or workforce housing. In the Gateway Zone, if you get one incentive, you have to do workforce housing. If you get multiple incentives, you have to do workforce housing and public realm improvements, which is not community space. It's typically off-site, like a public park or trail. And so these densities can be modified through the conditional use permit process in front of the planning board. And as I mentioned, more than one incentive requires both. More than one incentives were required to do both workforce housing and public realm improvements. And then we've talked about before, the workforce housing is the same as laid out in the RSA. If it's ownership, it's 100% of the median income, and for sale, or rental units, is 60%. So we've had two projects that have come before us that have provided workforce housing, West End Yards, and through their conditional use permit process, they negotiated different terms. They did 10% of the units at 80% AMI, and then the Cinemagic, which was recently approved, they did 20%. Those are for sale units. They did 20% at 100% AMI, and their term for their covenant was 50 years, and the West End Yards was 30 years. So let's see what else. That was the lips. So we haven't had any others come forward. There might be some in the works that are looking to do workforce housing, but as this committee goes forward, I think in the upcoming meetings, we'll look at these incentives. I think, is RKG going to do an analysis of the gateway as well?
Yep, in particular.
In particular. So that, Bob, was the next, you were thinking ahead.
Yeah.
As we're looking at the gateway, to how we can improve the.
Too long.
Yep.
You just moved in, that's all.
So hopefully I saved some time, kind of ran through that quickly, but
Does anyone here have any questions about this? I mean, this is just our first look at this.
Yep, right,
There'll
kind
be
of
a lot more looks, but I wanted to make sure our minds were fresh as far as where our standards sit in the gateway, so that when we do start to look at it, we have an idea.
So I'll be 30 seconds or less, but I recognize that slide because I think we had
Yeah,
that
you
in
had that.
an earlier presentation. My gut's telling me the biggest challenge we've got with the gateway districts is we have too many carrots and not enough sticks. So we're not getting enough workforce housing. We can show you the successes on the bottom of this page, but they represent the only successes. And we've had at least 5, 6, 7 projects get approved without any workforce housing, with high-density housing. So I think the carrots are too big and the sticks are too small, and that's what we're going to be calibrating, I'm guessing, going into this to get more of what we want. And I'm curious, and I think we need to tighten up, listening to what's happened with the West End Yards and Cinemagic. The term of the restriction, I mean, I'm used to perpetuity myself when I've dealt with this in other jurisdictions, and if that's not allowed, and we need longer-term restrictions, and I don't know how that, it's obviously been negotiated, and I'm not sure why we wouldn't firm that up in the code to create a term that is, it's not 30 for one, 50 for another, 75 for another. Seems like that shouldn't be so negotiable, but that's just me. Because it plays out, people will be sitting in these chairs 30 years from now, and these units are going to disappear if there's only 30 year.
Just in the whole balance, downtown or in Gateway District, let's just say, right now it's community space and, or
Workforce housing.
workforce. But if let's say you had, for instance, you have to do 30% community space. But if you do workforce, maybe that community space goes down to 20%. Is there something like that can be?
Well, I think we want to explore all of that because we don't, so the answer is yes, could be. Is that the appropriate way to do it? Don't know.
Well,
But we're
that might
hiring
just not
somebody
what you do it,
to
that's not-
teach us the math. So then we can calibrate, as Rick keeps showing us. We need to find the right balance to get this to work. And none of us are equipped with that data yet to be able to do that. But that's exactly the kind of thinking I think we need when we get the data, is how then do we balance what we're looking for? I think we also have too many workforce housing projects in the Gateway that are coming in that don't have enough amenities for even the people that live there, let alone the surrounding context. I mean, Cinemagic does have stuff because Peter pointed out they were a project, so they were required to have public realm. They went for the conditional use permit for the density, but most people are not asking for a conditional use permit to do workforce housing, and we're getting no amenities for not only the people that live there, but the surrounding context, and that seems to me to be short.
Just backing off what you said, Nick, as far as the negotiations on the terms and the percentage of AMI, is that just because that's the way that's been done in the past? Is that why it's been done? Or
I think the AMI.
negotiating it?
I'm not sure why the AMI is negotiated other than going deeper affordability than what the RSA sets I'd call it the floor,
Yeah.
right? You shouldn't be going above the floor. But, so I can't speak to how we got there in the first project we ever saw.
I can.
But go ahead.
I'm probably the only person here who knows this. Just yesterday afternoon, there was a long meeting upstairs to talk about the idea, and even Councilor Moreau doesn't know this yet, to have a standard city form for the covenant for workforce housing that talks about things like term and criteria, so that right now what's happening is that the developers' attorneys are coming up with draft forms for the legal department to review and try to work with, and it's not as clear and concise and clean, in my opinion, as it would be if you said, here's
Here
the
it
city
is.
form, here's the way the city, and it's been reviewed by council, it's been reviewed by legal departments, it's been reviewed by the planning board, so it doesn't exist yet, but that's the idea. And so that would then be given to the applicant, so we don't have to deal with somebody else's concept, and it would address what Nick was
That's a
talking
great
about.
idea, to me.
Are you talking more about what happened at West End Yards?
I mean, that, I'm trying to ask these questions
So-
because I know the public doesn't understand as well.
Yeah,
you know?
I was a planning board member through all of that, and we spent well over a year, I want to say it was closer to 18 months, having work sessions with the developers on that, and they could not do any more or workforce housing at any other levels and get financing and be able to build the project, and that was truly the end result. And they brought us tons of financial documents that we all had to pour through and meet with them, and the end result was, I mean, they started at a first proposal of over 300 units, and we wanted, I think it was 20%, and we ended up going down to 10%, and then still the AMI, if we didn't go up to the 80% for rental units, they weren't going to be able to build it. And it was one of those things where we just really wanted, let's have one project that actually gives us workforce housing, and that seemed to be a good negotiation at that time, because it was the only way financially for them to be able to actually get financing with the bank and be able to make all the numbers work, so.
So we're really lucky that we're going to have RKG be able to come in and test, because that probably is the biggest challenge for us. They can come in and talk about financing and equity and the ability to make it work. None of us are financial analysts, so it's a very challenging prospect to challenge what they're presenting and not just accept it. And I'm not suggesting that happen, but you've got to have the expertise to actually know what they're talking about, to know whether it's right or not. And I think having RKG come on board, boy, that would be great if we could get some of that information that was presented for the West End Yards and have them test it, because if they're right, that's going to be important. If they're wrong, it's important.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Any other conversation? All right, we have several people online and several people in the room. We'll start in the room. If people online want to speak, just please raise your virtual hand and we will get to you. And it is getting to be a late hour, so if we could keep our comments to at least a reasonable amount of time, that would be great. Just each person needs to come up and sit and speak into a microphone, and make sure you say your name and address for the record.
You can face this way, too, if you will.
You can turn the chair around.
We can sit in like AC Slater.
Megan Corsetti, Colonial Drive. Sorry, I came in late. So I wanted to ask specifically about this preliminary review for city-owned parcels for potential workforce. It was mentioned that this was going to be going back to the council, and I guess I'm just trying to understand what they're going to do with this, because I thought at the land use meeting back in April or March, excuse me, there was discussion about having like a technical review, and it sounds like a couple of people walked the properties, and I do appreciate that very much. So I just was kind of wondering, it seems like we still have more information to get. And another thing too, just sort of looking at it, obviously, we learned the first time and we're learning again, there isn't a lot of developable land. I'm glad we found some, hidden treasures that will be fun to go on walking trails. But I do think it's important too that we're keeping in mind of what any future needs might be of the city. There was a meeting the other night about climate change and, what's our future here in Portsmouth. And I just get a little bit nervous about the 1 5-acre parcel of land that could be developed as anything being used now when we don't know if Little Harbor School is going to be okay 10 years from now. So I just think it's important that that's kept in mind. So I have little children that I'm thinking about their future, and hopefully more family down the road that we have to be worried about. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking not only of today, because it is important, but also of what's coming down the road. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Liza Hewitt, 726 Middle Road. I'm just wondering if somebody can explain to the public what the public improvement plan is. You mentioned a public improvement plan. I don't need an answer right now, but it wasn't explained what the public improvement plan is. I guess it relates to the ADU handbook or something. So if somebody could explain that at some point, that would be wonderful.
I promise to do that very quickly. And if I misspoke, I apologize. It's not a public improvement plan. It's a public involvement plan.
Okay.
And one of the charges of not only my position, but also the Land Use Committee in their work plan is developing a sequential involvement process with the public to make sure that everybody has a chance to comment on any housing policy changes that are going to be occurring.
Okay. Thank
We
you.
should have said engagement versus involvement. But
So that's another thing.
Yeah.
In the future, I'm sure it will be intermixed between a public involvement plan and a public engagement plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
The second part of your, the density and incentives, I guess as somebody that really knows nothing about any of this but tries very hard to understand, spot zoning, I mean, it feels like, you know, the McIntyre decision's been made. Now the Land Use Committee meets the same week. There seem to be changes to this that were made sometime between Monday and Wednesday. It's being presented here. It's now going to the City Council. I didn't even hear any discussion about whether that was ready. It just sounds like it's just off to the City Council. It seems like a lot. It seems very fast. I'm sure there's some reason behind that, but I don't know. Nothing good comes from doing things that quickly, as far as I'm concerned. But that's just my opinion. The last thing, as far as the discussion under the workforce housing properties, I brought this up before. I would still really like to hear from PHA about potential redevelopment of their sites. We have Mr. Welch that sits here on this committee. You know, nothing's been spoken about. We've just immediately gone to city properties that are available with no discussion. You know, this is land use. That's what we're here for, right? So he's got land. Everybody wants to use land for workforce housing. So shouldn't that be part of the discussion? What else is available? We're talking, you know, Nick made some comments about private land that could be used for this, that, or the other thing. Well, that's kind of private public land, I guess, that could be used as well. So why is that being left completely out of the discussion? We're talking about private land, we're talking about the public land that Portsmouth owns, and we've left a huge chunk by somebody that has a very large stake in developing this land. I would like a discussion by Mr. Welch or somebody from PHA about their properties and what might be redeveloped and, you know, there. I think that's a piece that's missing. Thank you.
thank you. Next.
Manuel Garganta, 471 Colonial Drive. I'd like to thank Mr. Cracknell and the board members that did the walk around on these properties. I assume it was very enlightening. It was enlightening to me. Just a quick, I just came back from Jacksonville, Florida. First night I turned on the news, they're having problems with workforce housing. And they're the largest city by land mass in the United States. They get more, we could put 20 Portsmouths in Jacksonville. And the problem is money. So just a little side on that. One of the things I noticed on the list, I hate to bring a community campus. Is there a reason we didn't look at that? Or I know there's a lot of wetlands out there. Did we walk that?
Well, go ahead.
So community campus has a lot of wetlands. There's not a lot of dry land that's not already a parking lot or built on, but I think the city would like to do a whole envisioning around community campus and I think because we have recreation fields there already, that trying to put recreation all in a similar area, like a hub spot for recreation, maybe that is more of a focus for that property. So I think we would like to take a longer look at that.
Isn't there more like a 4.5 or 5 acre parcel out there?
They're delineating the wetlands
No, it's
now.
almost all
Yeah,
wet.
it's almost all wetlands that's left, yeah.
But they're going to have a plan in the next week or two, I think.
Right.
No, I'm just wondering,
So it doesn't mean something can't happen
Oh, no.
there. I want to be
I
clear.
noticed that on that original original 195 list.
Yeah.
The other one was, and I think we talked about this before, former Mayor Beckstead brought it up, the old skate park.
Yeah, it's on my list at the back.
That has,
Yeah, the building there is
They
leased
leased them.
to
They leased
Operation.
that.
Yeah, the building's been leased to Operation Blessing.
is that perpetuity?
I can't. I don't think so. I know we renewed it somewhat recently. I don't remember the terms off the top of my head.
Oh,
But
sometimes.
to me, that is an opportunity, even if they're still in there. The building is old, it's squat, and it's a big parcel. It's something that,
There are
you
some
know,
deed restrictions, but yeah, we can look into that at the end of the
Okay,
lease.
actually.
Because I think there would be another, because it hit,
Greenleaf.
PHA has
Chase.
the Wamsat right next to it. There's another building across
I know,
the
I stare
street.
at this
It's like-
land from my office all the time.
It's worth looking at.
I just thought I'd bring that up, because
Yep.
that is a good idea. And it's, you could put, like former Mayor Beckstead said, you can put a 5-story building out there.
So I don't know why I missed it in my 11 properties, but when we drove up Greenleaf to look at the back of the, I looked at the
Chase
back of
home
the Chase home, right? Which
Exactly.
isn't city either.
Exactly.
And there's a couple of acres there of uplands, which, again, most of these properties are not like prime candidates to go in and cut everything down and blow up the rock to put in a building. But I drove by that building you're describing, the skate,
Correct, the old
whatever it's
skate park,
called.
right.
And I'm like, wow, that's tired.
It used to be the old Coast Guard.
And it would be a great opportunity to do something there. So that, I'll make sure there's a footnote in this to
Right,
at
it's-
least make sure we acknowledge that, because we took photos of it and looked at it.
We'd have to wait for the skate park to move.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
probably another
yeah.
year away,
Oh, yeah.
plus the
Takes
lease.
time.
But
But
it's
yeah, that's a
something-
longer term.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Long-term view.
Yeah, exactly.
Next.
Well, maybe. Good morning, Elizabeth Brader, property owner, 159 McDonough Street. I just want to go over this stuff briefly. I didn't write a nice long letter. The 600 square feet, I just looked at that recently when we looked at ADUs. I presented that to the city council. I'll be happy to bring that paperwork back. That shows you how much space 600 square feet is. I actually looked at 750, but I went all the way down to 400. I'll bring those in. I did have a question about if we're going to limit it to 600 as the bottom of the threshold at 600 feet, then why are we looking at affordable housing for 3-person households or 4-person households when they're probably not going to are children included in that number?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you'd get easily 3 people in
In
a
there,
2-bedroom
okay.
unit.
I just wanted to be sure about that before
Yep.
I moved on. The density bonus and the overlay districts for the 10-5A4621, is there any reason why we don't include workforce housing within 100 feet of the North Mill Pond? I noticed that's not,
And
overlay incentive.
I haven't got it in front of me.
Yeah.
it's because it doesn't have it does have it.
No, are you at, so can you reframe the question today or in the proposed language?
In the proposed language, I don't see anything for workforce housing in that.
No, it is in, it should be in
It's
there.
at beyond 100 feet. For
Okay.
622 is beyond 100 feet. I didn't see it in 21.
Working on it. Hang on.
Page 3. I'll try to help you.
It is on page 3,
It is on page 3,
and
but
it's required. And it's not or, it's and. So that's the change. You have to
Right,
do
we're
both.
just- We're requiring both.
There's an and
instead
up
of
at
just
the,
one.
here. There's an and, so you don't choose one or the other. And
but
then-
that's for 100 feet away. The first one is
Oh, I see
under
what you're
100
saying.
feet.
Right.
We've got a huge development project going in there, which is within the 100 feet.
Yes. So you're
But there's
right.
There's no workforce housing being required within 100 feet. That's all I'm saying.
Yep.
And I
And
was
you could-
questioning why that wasn't being added.
Probably wasn't being asked because it's going to be 50
can
years
look into
before
it.
anybody's going to do anything else within 100 feet because it's all done.
It's all done.
Yeah.
Well, there
But
isn't. There's
we
one
could-
more piece of property there.
We can look at it.
Where is it?
Just, oh, thank you. We're moving on, so.
Where's the other property?
I'm not, we're looking at it later.
It's public comment, not
Public
discussion.
comment. Okay. That's right.
We've got to move on.
I'm trying to do it the right way. You already dealt with that one, the units, yeah. The density bonus for over 1 acre, is that in specific zoning? Just because I didn't look it up.
Oh, so it's already in the code. And,
Yeah, I know.
you know, to the spot zoning issue, there are 8 or 10 properties it applies to today, and it's applied to them when it was adopted
I'm just
originally.
asking, is it in CD5, CD?
It's-
Thank you.
CD5 and 4.
Well, no.
Thank you very much.
It's any district. It doesn't have to be CD 5 or 4. If you
So-
have more than an acre of property and you're in the character districts, it doesn't say 5 or 4, you have the ability to use that incentive today.
So
to get a
somebody in
taller
CD 4L2
Yeah, I'm
on
pretty sure it says
Islington
that.
Street, who has more than an acre, could
Yep.
put in a 50,000 square foot building?
If the community space is on top of the
If it's a new-
subterranean
new
parking, yeah,
definition
of course.
footprint. New definition of footprint.
And find me one.
Well,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'd need a big fire.
an acre isn't really that much.
It is in the Islington Street corridor.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to think about that one. And I'm just bringing this up for you, just for people to think about. And Russell Street is a good example of a pretty large piece of property. It was three separate pieces. They could have made it one, but I think they left it at 3 to be able to get the 20,000 and the 30,000 and put the parking underneath and all of that. But I think it's an example of where 50,000 square feet might have been a pretty overwhelming amount in one long building. That's a huge building. And that was one of the things that the HDC talked about, is we need to put corridors in between there and break up the building because it was just so enormous. So 50,000 square feet to me is a very, very large building to have all in one long way. And if 50% of it is possible to make these community spaces, you don't necessarily have to put them between the buildings. And that's my concern, is how long a building is this going to be? There's a place in Dover called Point Place, and they have a real long building down the middle, but between it they have alleyways so you can get from one side to the other. So I think that needs to be thought about. I think the 15 feet up is acceptable. People will shoot me in the community, because if you put in fire suppression or anything like that, you need more than 10 feet. So 15 feet seems like a lot, and I am concerned about that you're going to have 55, 60-foot buildings, no sunshine, all that other good stuff. But I understand the 15 feet, having done some fire stuff recently in one of my buildings, and it's really overwhelming when you don't have enough space. I was curious what the difference is. We can't discuss, but just to clarify, because when I read this, the pedestrian passageway and the pedestrian arcade seem like the same thing to me, and it doesn't make any sense when I read this as a plain thing without any other description what the difference between these two are. And then I wanted to just comment on what the planning board can do in regards to community space. I was at a planning board meeting in Dover, and a developer presented a dock for kayaks and for canoes, and went on, and obviously had put a lot of time and energy into doing it. Unfortunately, not more than 50 feet down the river is a dam and is a drop-off, and there's a nice little buoys there, and they said, no way, but this is what you can do instead. And their planning department is very bold in what they do. They're friendly with you, but they will just tell you straight out these are our suggestions. They do it very politely, but they already look at something, and when they think it's not within what they want to see in the city, that planning board just comes right out and says, this is what we'd rather see. Now, I don't know if our planning board will ever get that bold, but there are a lot of times I bring things forwards, and I think that I'd really like the planning board to really be a little more direct in what could be done instead of me as a person getting up and saying, well, why don't we do this instead? So that was just my point on that, is that I want to see a bold planning board. And this I think should have been the existing building from 2 to 3 feet. I am a firm believer in coming down in the height because of the fact that less is more, and then you can add your 15 feet to it. But the catch on that is that this was done not too long ago. We just did this, so I'm worried about how people will view that. That's it for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, just real quick to that, I want Liz not to leave here, or anybody else not hearing an answer. The arcade and the passageway are meant to be different. The arcade is open. The passageway has a roof and 2 walls. The arcade is open like 46. So the illustrations will help make it clear what the difference is between an arcade that has an open sidewall on the edge of a building like 46 Maplewood. But importantly, on the issue of the building footprint, we have all the existing dimensional controls still applying to all new buildings. And right now, just because you could do 50,000 square feet for something like the McIntyre, which is one of 8 properties, not just one, we have building block length requirements that are still going to apply. You're not going to be able to create the Harbor Core wall if this passes, just because it allows a bigger building footprint. And the AC Hotel, just as an example, is a 40,000 square foot footprint, but all of its community space is obviously stuffed in behind the Vanguard gym along the waterfront. And that would be different at 50%. So.
Next.
Good morning. Petra Huda, 280 South Street. First thing I want to ask you about is a process that we're going through this morning. I'm having trouble understanding if what we are looking at as a discussion is going to move forward right now after this discussion to the City Council. Yes or no? Is that what we're doing?
Part 1. So we started this discussion last meeting. For the record, we talked about the downtown incentives for CD 4 and 5 last meeting, and then we talked about it again this meeting with the idea of now moving it forward. These were short-term changes that City Council requested we take a look at.
Okay, so I was at the last meeting, and it just seemed like Nick was throwing something out. So that was not my understanding, and the changes on here are substantial. Especially on the density bonus. This is definitely spot zoning, obviously, to everybody. The problem here is I think there's something that we're not taking into account, especially for the McIntyre, in that this is in the historic district. This is the heart of the historic district. And what you're doing is expanding the heights that you're looking at are not that expanded. But
In fact, the same.
But the size, well, you're looking at somewhere a 5
Taking
foot.
5 away and adding 5.
Right, but the size is huge, and the concept here of giving more community space when, as I think Howard mentioned, the focus is really here, but you're not going to get that here. I mean, it's obvious to everybody.
Well, if you don't get it, it won't happen. You won't.
That's right. It's not going to happen, Nick. Yeah. I mean, we've had history that gives us what's going to happen, and if they have the opportunity to take community space, of which you're giving them 16 choices now, they're going to take the other.
What's the other?
They're going to take giving community space to expand their footprint. That's a big question here. The other question I would ask here is, I'm not understanding the process because previously all of this stuff went back to the planning board for review. So you're shooting it right.
It has to go to City Council to be referred to the planning board.
Okay, and
That's
so
how everything goes.
And so how did we get to this being a final then?
It's to go up for public hearings.
It's actually a first draft that would go to the council, and if the council wants to refer it to the planning board, they will, and the planning board will review it under a hearing, and it won't come out of there until the planning board is ready. And if, based on past practice, will probably be amended.
Okay.
Before
Okay.
it goes back to the council, and
Okay.
then there'll be a new hearing at the council with the
Okay.
final language.
Okay, I'm trying to
there's-
understand the process.
Yeah, right?
The next thing I want to ask on and basically the same thing. I'm trying to understand the process on the referral on the properties for
City stuff.
for the city stuff. So basically, Howard stated that you and Howard went out and looked at this, and it is your opinion.
Yes.
So I'm trying to understand what the numbers here mean then.
Oh, in the matrix?
In the matrix.
Come in and see me. I mean,
Didn't understand that.
Yeah.
We had all kind of numbers here, and it looked like
one's bad
of course
and
it
5
looks,
is good.
Of course, it looks like Sherburne's the best. The other thing here is, if I'm understanding this correctly, this is also going to the council. Or,
We need more direction, so I would like to take it to the council and ask where they want us to go from here.
so I guess, based on what Manny said, you didn't even consider Greenleaf. Do you really think this is ready for the council?
Greenleaf is probably another year before we could even consider doing anything.
I'm going to add Greenleaf. I mean, that was an oversight not putting it in there. It
Right.
should be in there.
Right.
But I'm not going to suggest it's 100% complete, but I am going to suggest it's 98% complete. There may be another parcel in there like Greenleaf, but I bet you'd be challenged to find 2 more. It's not the end here.
Okay.
What we're looking for, as I
More
hear Beth,
direction.
is more direction. What do you want us to do? Do you want us to drill down and get more technical information on any of those 4 sites now with Greenleaf? And is there
Okay.
something else missing? Add it to the list. Tell us what to do, because drilling down is going to cost money to
Okay.
hire people.
Okay, so I guess my final comments on the third density bonus that you're going to
Yeah.
put forward is I would definitely like to see the council and somebody look at HDC here. This is in the heart of the HDC, and the arguments before were on the height and the density
Yep.
in that area. So that's one thing, and then I guess the only other thing would be to please consider more public comment on this and running it through the planning board. Thank you.
Thanks.
One more.
I promise I'll be quick.
Thank you.
No problem. Page Trace, 27 Hancock Street. My question, my first issue is with 10.5A 45.10, which is essentially the carrots that you are considering offering a developer within the 4 and 5 district downtown. And obviously, as a past member of the subcommittee for McIntyre, I understand what essentially you're trying to do. But I'm concerned with several parts of this in the vague way that this is worded, particularly with the public observation deck. The public was not involved in the modification of the community plan, and I get why they weren't. My issue is not with the modifications. My issue is that potentially you could be offering a carrot, and you have to offer it the way you've worded it, whether a developer wants to build on top of the old post office, or whether they want to put a great observation deck on a new building that overlooks the river. They're obviously going to put it in the cheapest place possible. So I'm concerned that an observation deck over the old post office is not going to be the same public benefit as an observation deck over a new building facing the river. As to the McIntyre building itself, currently, if you don't depart yet from the monuments program, as a hypothetical, I'm saying as part of the monuments program, building on top of that building was an absolute off the cards, not available, nobody's putting a deck up there. And now all of a sudden we're broaching the idea, and I get 3 years from now it's possible. But what's not being taken into consideration is the historic preservation easements of SHPA and 106. And I think that the building is, unfortunately, due to a past city manager, part of the contributing national downtown district, historic district. And I think as such, SHPO, both state and federal level, might have something to say about easements. Not that a pretty plaque can't be put up and somebody can, get rid of something in 3 years' time, but it is something to be concerned about. I think the same thing goes with pedestrian arcade. And I think that there are a lot of things that you want to protect, but that is probably a little vague to go to the planning board at this point, or vague to go to the land use boards. We talk about ADUs and how Design elements, Nick, you had a huge presentation on the design elements and how it was a great chart, a map, to explain to somebody who wanted to build an ADU how to get there. From point A to point B, it was a lot quicker to have that road map than have nothing. You know, all humor aside, nobody wants a Mr. Peanut in someone's backyard. But in the same breath, you can't just ignore different parts of what already occurred, even that we know. We know that the National Park Service didn't like the height and the mass of the original plan of one of the two buildings. It was too tall, and it was still lower than the original building. So where does the council plan to go on this with a developer with land use boards when you're not yet ready to tackle that? And something this is the first I've seen of this, but do these plans indeed allow someone to build a building taller than the current McIntyre building as a contributing building in the historic district?
No.
So no matter what, even with an incentive, with 4 incentives,
No.
no. Thank you.
Absolutely no.
That's about all I have to say about the McIntyre. Good luck. I know you've tried your hardest. I don't even want to know what's next. And as far as public city property goes, I too, like Liza Hewitt, sorry, God, not enough sleep this morning. Someone in the household left at 3:30 in the morning, so I'm dealing on one cylinder. Someone left, and I would like to know why Craig Welsh has not been asked to give a critique on his portfolio of real estate.
I'm happy to ask him that.
I think that the public deserves the benefit of hearing that before he starts to want more city property. Anyway, thank you. I know you have other people.
Thank you. And we have one person on Zoom.
Yeah, good morning. Peter, Officer, Colonial Drive. So early my comments circle around the list of properties for that are city-owned properties that could be used for affordable housing development. First question I had is, of the 3 properties within the agenda, they looked to be in numerical order. So I was wondering, are those stack ranked order? Is that like, by number 1? Looks like we're answer that.
No.
Okay, great, thank you. So then moving forward, this committee was asked to perform analysis of available land that could be used for developed workforce housing, right? When the initial list was compiled and reviewed at a meeting a couple months ago, it was clear that absolutely no critical thinking was put into the compilation of that list. I'm glad to see that this committee pushed back on that initial deliverable. There was nothing more than a data poll that listed out the city-owned properties. I was at the city council meeting where the directive was given to this committee to analyze all city-owned properties that could be used for affordable housing. And I have to say that the initial poll, if I was giving it a grade, I'd give it maybe a D+. During the discussion today, it was called out multiple times that, after that initial list was polled, that more work needed to be done. So I'm glad that people took the time to, take more of a scrutinous eye towards that list, walk a couple properties, conduct a little bit more of investigation. But it was called out multiple times that what that analysis consisted of was not scientific at all. There was no engineering efforts, no traffic studies, no site work really done other than a nice kind of walk through a couple parks. So we're working our way towards a C. So obviously the work's not done yet, guys. I think the push here, we got 3 city council members sitting on this board or on this committee. The push to drive it back to council is, it's just not there yet. We're not there yet. You guys haven't done the job. You haven't completed the work. It's also very frustrating to join these meetings, and listen to the work that's been done to evaluate properties, only to continue to hear from members of the public that there are a number of properties that were missed or not included. So again, to use the words of one of the committee members here that was at that initial meeting where the list was reviewed, to deliver this back to council at this point, again, it's a political football. And, I would hope that you guys, take another swing. There's no rush here, except for maybe some term limits. But there's no rush, especially when we're thinking about the length, the city as a whole. So we got to do what's right. We got to get it above a C. Let's get to a passing grade, guys. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, I can't raise my hand. I have no hand on my screen.
Okay, can you give us your name and address for the record, please?
Yep, absolutely. Rick Beckstead, 1395 Visited Street. I just wanted to thank the committee for its due diligence on where we are now. And as the previous speaker said, we are far from really making any major decisions. I did want to speak on the simple fact of two things. Greenleaf, where we have the old skate park. That is literally, to me and to many in the community, a advisable way for us to be able to go and move forward with some type of housing. Maybe not even workforce housing, maybe actually some affordable housing, seeing that Wambusett is directly across the street. I know that they use it from time to time with limits that are taken with Crossroads using the place. We actually get notifications when the skate park is closed down. They use it as a recreation area. But I'm sure that if it was something that was meant for Craig Welch, the Portsmouth Housing Authority, we actually probably could include in that project some type of a recreation facility for the kids at Wambusett, as well as for a new building there. And then my last comment is basically with community campus. I served on the previous council. When we went and we purchased that, there were two factors that were there. One, the school, the daycare facility was in that building, that if a developer had gotten a hold of it, we would have had over 300 kids that would have been put out onto the streets, and parents in our community having to find daycare facilities for them. And it's a great program. My wife worked for it when she started her career teaching. The other two factors that were in community campus was there was 9 acres that were out back. 9 acres, not necessarily that were just wetlands, but what most people in the community don't understand is in the back of that is where urban renewal has been buried. The city actually, when we partook in the sale of the $10 million for the property, 250 of that was actually used for remediation, held aside for remediation for some of the land that's out back there. And we're actually under litigation right now with the people that own the old garage on Banfield Road, because once again, urban renewal, and this was done by Portsmouth Housing Authority many, many years ago before anyone involved, Craig Welch or anyone else. It's a big mess out there. You have residents out there that have concerns, as well as the property owner of the garage. The other factor is we had 4 dry acres, buildable, usable, on the front towards Lafayette Road. We need to start serious discussions on having, I know that the council recently over the last year went and approved to go and upgrade the tennis courts that are there and putting them into pickleball courts. That's great. But it was the council that once said, we need to start putting priorities of people first versus recreation. And we used that excuse when it came to Sherburne School and a softball field. Well, pickleball courts is a little bit different than a softball field, since we only have 2 in the entire city. And if we develop Sherburne School and fill in that, we will only be reduced to 1. Again, thank you very much for everything you do, and have a nice day.
Thank you. And we also have one more person that has raised their hand. Krista, officer.
Yep, Krista, officer, Colonial Drive. I just had a question. I know the comment was like drilling down costs more money. So as a resident, I'm just wondering, when you pull in engineers, is that something that this subcommittee would hire, or does that go to council? Basically, like, how would hiring an expert or engineer work? Who makes that decision?
So council makes decisions on whether or not we can spend money and whether or not there's money to do it. They give that directive to the city manager. So this committee really needs to go back and talk to council about what the next steps are. In order to drill down more and hire consultants, we have to go back to council to get that directive.
Okay. And then for the planning board, it seemed like they would only accept something that's like a little more formalized at this point?
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to. If you're referring to the properties, the planning board doesn't really
Right.
have a role in that.
Yeah, I thought the planning board would just say like yes or no to a plan, and they wouldn't look at 3 different properties and say which one's best.
Correct. The planning board doesn't have a role in that part.
Perfect.
Thank you. It doesn't look like we have anyone else. I think we are good to adjourn. Thank you, everyone.